reports coming into one center, you can actually plot them out and attempt to establish a origin, direction, field of occurrence, those kinds of things that any one witness would be almost impossible to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the problems that we're experiencing in ufology. You know, we've built these computers, and we have the internet, and we have databases, and what is happening, whereas we should be bringing all of these cases into one or into a small number of facilities, so all of these cases can be looked at and compared to one another. Everybody and his brother is setting up a website that has a UFO sighting report form on it. So we're actually going in the wrong direction, in my opinion. But there's very little that one person can do about that. It's just not possible to try to convince people that what we ought to be doing is bringing all of these cases into one or a small number of databases so that we can look at all of them from on high, if you will.
Well, the sad truth about that one is we would have to have a discussion of how exactly you could ever get ufologists in one room to agree on how it should be organized and who should be in charge. And I suspect that would be a whole other program or series of programs that you and I and probably some other people could do.
Yeah, it is indeed. The politics of ufology is very interesting to me. In some respects, it's even more interesting than the UFO phenomenon itself. I am convinced that we are being visited routinely. As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we are being visited on this planet routinely by these things we call UFOs. But what is even more interesting to me from an intellectual standpoint is the human response to the apparent presence of UFOs on our planet and the apparent or the sightings of apparent UFOs. The things that people do, the things that people say, the things that people believe or don't believe, and I know you and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, those things are even of greater interest to me than the UFOs themselves and what the significance of all these sightings may be.
That's very true. I want to at least get to a couple of these questions. Here's a question about if you had to put an estimate on how many reports you get of triangles, and do they tend to be in a certain region?
Yeah. Well, I can field that, but I suspect you could probably handle it as well. But let me take the first stab at it, Jim.
Sure.
I don't know. I have not measured the percentage of reports of triangular objects that the National UFO Reporting Center has received. And then there's the question of trying to distinguish the sighting of triangles from the sightings of lights, multiple lights oriented in a triangular fashion. Those are two separate, distinct phenomena. But trying to separate them from one another is very difficult. So I don't know, I can't quantify it, but people can go to my website, ufocenter.com, and they can sort all of the reports by the type of object that was seen and reported. And they can do their own tally. They can do their own statistics, calculate percentages if they wish to do so. That's part of the reason that I post the data as we do, so people can look at the raw data. After all, I was born in Missouri, the Show Me state, 63 years ago. I like that tradition, the principle of show me. See it with your own eyes, and then you may believe it. But I'm sorry, I just can't answer the question with any degree of accuracy, so in that circumstance,
I think
decline.
I think you did a much better job because basically I've used your website for research myself, and I would urge everyone to do it. And I don't know of anybody who has more consistently and conscientiously put together a database than at the National UFO Reporting Center. I want to go on to another question in the interest of time. There's a question is, what does the UFO community generally agree about what Area 51 is? And I would just take a stab at that one. first off, I think the facility is now largely defunct, which is why they have now let some of the retirees talk, which is the basis for a brand new book called Area 51. And I'm not going to launch into all the aspects of that in the interest of time. Suffice it to say that it has a radical new theory about Roswell that I absolutely disagree with for a variety of reasons. I think that this is yet another attempt at disinformation, and the only thing I'm convinced of is somebody out there must have the truth about Roswell and be getting ready to expose it even better than it's already been done. And there have been a number of excellent books about it recently in the last few years, because the disinformation explanations are becoming more and more absurd. And I would certainly put the new book, Area 51, into that category. Although the rest of the book is a fascinating read about military history and spy planes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know much about Area 51. It may be an urban legend that it has anything to do with UFOs. About the only really intriguing evidence I've ever seen that Area 51 has anything to do with UFOs is some nighttime video with night vision devices of objects that appear to have very unusual flight characteristics that cannot be readily ascribed to conventional aircraft with wings and tails and engines and so on. But aside from that, I don't know that we have any strong evidence or any evidence at all that there are UFOs at Area 51. I agree with your assessment that it's probably an area where we have discreetly built and tested very exotic aircraft.
Yeah, that part I'm absolutely convinced of. I also recall that it's now become so environmentally contaminated, and I believe there was an actual lawsuit. I don't know whether it was settled in private or not, but apparently a group of wives sued because their husbands who worked there got rapid onset cancer caused by exposure to exotic rocket fuel and probably radiation from the days of nuclear testing. So I don't think there's a whole lot going on there anymore. Yeah. I have a question about, this is an interesting question, and I'm not sure I'll get it right. What allowance for error correction do you implement in your database on the description of sightings, since most sightings are based on perception rather than conception?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting sort of question.
And I think the straightforward answer is we make no allowance, because a person in my position, even with a lot of reports, is not in any kind of special position to be able to say which reports absolutely are true and about UFOs and which reports might be cases of mistaken identity. I can't do that. As much as I would love to be able to do so, in my heart of hearts, I know that our database is probably fraught with cases of sophisticated hoaxes, cases of mistaken identity, and frankly, most of the reports we receive really are not very useful, and most of them, in my opinion, don't warrant follow-up investigation. Now, that's only an impression, and oftentimes impressions are dead wrong, as we all know, but the database is not something that is cast in stone. I cannot certify that each and every one of those reports is definitely a report of an alien spaceship. And anybody going to the website and just perusing the reports would quickly see that. It's full of reports of, as you were discussing earlier, the International Space Station, aircraft, contrails, helium-filled balloons, party balloons, perhaps Chinese lanterns, these pyrotechnic devices that are released from celebrations. It is as you know, you as a professional investigator during much of your life, James, you know it's very difficult to know what information, what testimony you can rely on and what testimony probably should be disposed of.
No, I agree totally. That's why I consider investigation to actually be an art as opposed to a science, because there's a lot of human judgment and experience and intuition and a whole lot of other factors that are involved in trying to assess what is really going on and what's worth pursuing and what's not.
Yeah.
And the best analogy, I've never panned for gold, but I have the feeling that investigating UFOs is a lot like how I envision it, that you spend a lot of time standing in very cold water and mud, and you spend a lot of time sluicing through all of the dross for the nuggets that you get.
Yeah.
But the nuggets are really worth it.
Yeah.
Because
That's
how many...
great. Yeah. Go ahead.
How many UFOs that are actually extraterrestrial do we need to change mankind's entire perspective on who we are and why we're here? We only need one.
That's right. And I think we've had many, many times more than one, frankly. Yep.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good analogy, and I use the same analogy for describing what skeptics, or more like skeptobunkers, the disinformation agents, do. I often compare what they do to two men walking down a stream bed. One's a professional gold miner, and the other is a skeptic that there's any gold in that stream. Well, the skeptic can bend over and he can pick up a pebble off the surface of the stream bed and say, there, if there were any gold, we would have gold here. But all I see is a rock. Whereas the professional gold miner knows that in order to get to the gold, you've got to go through a great deal of overburden, through rocks and sand and black sand to get to the actual gold that lies on bedrock underneath all of that gravel and all of what they call overburden. So, yeah, I like that analogy a lot.
So I'm trying to figure out, where will we be in a few years, and where is this all going? And is it becoming something, or are we going to just keep on? I mean, I love this subject with all my heart, as I know you do, but I keep hoping that there's going to be a defining moment, which, of course, a lot of people call disclosure. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I've discussed that issue actively for now 16 years, ever since I put forth my proposal for using passive radar for detecting UFOs out to a distance of, I suspect we could go out 250,000 miles. But if people would like to read my paper, I wrote it in the spring of 2004 in preparation for an appearance at the Mutual UFO Network annual symposium that was held in Denver at that time. Once we build a passive radar detection system for detecting UFOs and other targets in the near-Earth environment, and again, near-Earth environment goes out to a distance equal to the distance of the moon from the surface of our planet. Once we have a workable passive radar system, and I discuss this in my paper, the issue of disclosure, the need for disclosure, the need for having government admit to us what it knows goes away, because we can start telling the government what we are detecting with our passive radar systems, and that would put us in the driver's seat.
I'm not sure they're going to appreciate that.
No, I'm sure they won't. And in fact, interestingly, and I think I've shared this story with you on more than one occasion, the day my paper, which is available on our website, ufocenter.com, right on the home page on the left side, scroll down about half a page, you'll see it alluded to, my proposal for the use of passive radar to detect UFOs. The day my paper was published by MUFON on its website, I got a telephone call from a senior officer in the Central Intelligence Agency who called me to congratulate me on my line of reasoning. He said that he, as a trained physicist, his job for the CIA had been to build clandestine passive radar systems. they're attractive, excuse me, because they don't transmit their own signal. They only listen for reflected radio signals that are the broadcast signal of which is a commercial radio station or television station. That's what is usually used. So you never know when you are being detected. That's why they're called passive. So he called me up to congratulate me on my paper, and this is what he told me. He said, if I were successful in building the passive radar system that I describe in my paper, he said, you will, Peter, resolve the question of whether UFOs are real or not. And I was very flattered by his call. He and I have had several other conversations. Our last conversation, I'm afraid I got a little bent out of shape at him, telling him that I felt it was his responsibility as a public servant to be telling the American people what he and the CIA know about UFOs. And he was unmoved by my appeal.
Well, probably he couldn't be moved because it would have been a serious violation. One question is, how about the cost for building passive radar?
Yeah. Well, we have an engineer's estimate. I've assembled a team of engineers, electrical engineers, signal processors, antenna specialists, and software people who could build the prototype. We estimate that the prototype could run up to $750,000, 90% of which would be for the writing of the software. It's going to take a lot of software to do this. Once the prototype is done, once the software is debugged and it can be shown to work adequately well, we can build a station for somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, and it would take probably 4 stations to cover the entire United States, maybe 6 or 7 stations at most to cover the entire North American continent. So we're talking for under $1 million, and probably substantially less than that. If we could find somebody who could provide the software writing capabilities, it might be as low as $250,000 to build the prototype. We could end once and for all the debate over whether UFOs are real or not.
That's like, I mean, what can you say? We would all like to have that proof, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. I've studied this for years and years, and I've yet to have my own sighting experience, and I find myself envious of the people that I take reports from, some of them, because I keep wishing, I wish I was there. I wish I had the evidence right in front of my own eyes.
Yeah. Well, that's what I do at the National UFO Reporting Center. I invite our listeners to go to the website ufocenter.com. We've got about in excess of 70,000 reports posted there. Some are not UFO sighting reports. Some are just sightings of the International Space Station, other satellites. Even the crescent moon has been reported to me as a UFO. But people can read with their own eyes what we have collected over the last 17 years. It's a lot of data.
Exactly, and I would also urge anyone out there who's thinking about making a report of a UFO to the reporting center, or to anyone, is that you organize your thoughts before you make your report and try to record your data. In other words, take notes about when and where and what direction, and all those questions that people like us are going to be asking you once you make the report. In other words, you need to think about, how would I explain what I am observing or experiencing to someone who doesn't know anything about this subject and doesn't know anything about me or where I was? In other words, the goal is to be objective, reasonable, and keep it focused, on point. I'm trying to help you, Peter, so hopefully maybe someone out there will be brief.
Grinning from ear to ear, because you sound like the way I sound when I'm talking to people who call on the hotline. So anyway, I hope our listeners tonight have enjoyed this, and I agree, and thank you for mentioning it. If they have had a sighting, in fact, at any time in their lives, I've had people call me and submit reports from 70 and 80 years ago. And people say, well, it happened 2 weeks ago. Do you want me to report it? My response is, if you believe that you've seen an alien spacecraft from another part of the galaxy, whether it happened last night or 80 years ago, it's time to write it down and report it. And trying to get people to write a description of what they've seen is almost impossible, as you know. They'll talk about it. They'll talk about it at the 4th of July party or New Year's Eve or at any get-together, but trying to get them to write it down, to capture and preserve the information in a form that will allow it to be posted is difficult.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you, are you planning on leaving right now, or do you want to stay a while? This is really up to you. I've been told that we have more time if we want it.
Well, I was counting on an hour's program, and we've been on for an hour and a half. I could take a few more questions or make a few more comments, but I've got a few things to do this evening, so I would prefer not to drag it out too long if we could.
Well, then let me ask you one more question, and before I do want to tell people one thing that is readily available now, and of course this is a mixed blessing, is be sure to remember that most everybody now has a cell phone with a camera.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I say that that's a mixed blessing is, as you well know, it doesn't really do any good to show me a black rectangle with one little blob of light in it and have somebody say, see, that's the spaceship, because it doesn't really tell me anything, and I can't really do anything with it unless you can qualify that photograph quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, you are preaching to the choir, and you're saying things that are extremely important. I can't tell you how many photographs I look at in the course of a typical month, and I estimate that only about perhaps 1 in 10,000 is really unambiguously, almost certainly, a photograph of something that I cannot ascribe to a terrestrial object or a terrestrial event. Good, solid, unambiguous photographs of UFOs are extremely rare, as you probably know.
Yes, they are.
Extremely.
I have a good, I guess, closing question for you.
Okay.
And I like this question. Mm-hmm. Is government disclosure imperative in order for you to feel any vindication for your years of research in this subject matter, or is majority public acceptance satisfactory?
I think majority public acceptance would satisfy me. I've given up on the government, James, and even if they were to come clean and come forward and say, oops, we've been lying to the American people for 64 years, we still could not accept what they were telling us. So I think public acceptance is the best. A willingness of my fellow Americans to submit reports of what they have seen, if they see a UFO, is quite adequate to me. And again, the point I make is if we can build a passive radar system nationwide that feeds into a single website, the government becomes extraneous. The government position on UFOs is no longer a monopoly. They no longer have any value in this debate. We can show the American people directly, unambiguously, with objective, cogent data that we are being visited by objects that cannot be ascribed to aircraft, crash dummies, swamp gas, weather balloons, and other forms of nonsense that the U.S. government has foisted upon the American people for over half a century.
It would be hard to be much more eloquent than that, Peter. And I certainly, once again, I'm very grateful to you, Peter Davenport, for your continued service in this field, and I want to thank you for putting up with my technical hiccups tonight. And I also want to thank the audience for participating in this forum. And I need to say that, again, this is an EPIC presentation on Inception Radio Network. EPIC is the Extraordinary Phenomena Research Council, something I'm very proud to be a part of. I consider this a culmination of a personal evolution, and I'm hoping to open new doors, meet more people, investigate more subjects, and that's what this is all about. Because I'm not convinced that just studying UFOs is going to get me to the answer in my quest for personal truth, although I'm never going to give up studying UFOs, as you probably can figure. So once again, this has been James Clarkson with EPIC, and I want to announce that on July 11th, our Director of Investigations for EPIC, Chase Kletzky, will present Patty Greer, who is a crop circle researcher for the United Kingdom. And I hope you will all tune in for that program. And once again, thank you all sincerely for this opportunity to continue on the EPIC voyage. Have a good evening.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's EPIC Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for EPIC. Until next time.